I'm Chip Rogers, and welcome to the AAHOA Educational Experience. This week, we are again talking about taxes. You need to protect yourself, and we have a couple of gentlemen here who are experts in making sure that you do protect yourself. To my right is Rahul Ranadive with GTEC, and then, I know you said it twice, but we're going to make you say it again.
Global Tax and Estate Council.
So, Global Tax and Estate Council. And to his right, Parag Patel with the Patel Law Offices, and these two gentlemen specialize in tax law and protecting taxpayers. And we have, in previous episodes, talked about not only what your obligations are, how you can structure your business to make sure that you don't get in trouble from the beginning, the need really to have a tax attorney working with a good CPA to make sure that you are covered. We talked about the Offshore Voluntary Disclosure Initiative, but sometimes policies from the federal government actually stem out of cases or prosecutions or news stories. And both of you have mentioned this before, but I want to inform myself and the viewers about the HSBC India case and what that has meant.
Well, that's really been a big trigger for a lot of the activity recently because HSBC has been under subpoena by the IRS to turn over their accounts of U.S. holders. And that has led to a lot of the people entering the OVDI program or not, and then the particular case that we mentioned was Dr. AAHOA in Minneapolis, who was indicted for not reporting his HSBC account in India.
Was this, he had just massive amounts of wealth in this account that they were coming after? I mean, had he done something that was so nefarious that it triggered all this? I mean, what was the situation?
He had several million dollars in this is HSBC India,
right,
that we're talking about, and it was him, and there was another gentleman in New Jersey earlier this year, and there was another person in Long Island in New York, and there's probably several others that are in the works. But the important thing to know is that if you have an HSBC India account, then it's very likely that the IRS will learn of your name, and you want to make sure that you are fully complying with all the tax laws and disclosure requirements with respect to that account. And you should have taken advantage of the OVDI program. And if you have not, then there's still possible solutions that are available to basically come clean and to avoid criminal prosecution.
You know, we've not really focused on that on the criminal prosecution standpoint, but taking 25% of a person's highest net wealth over the last few years is fairly onerous. But I think most people would willingly trade that to make sure they don't go to jail. But we haven't really talked about that. I mean, if you don't come forward and you are hiding assets and hiding wealth, and they come after you and they decide to criminally prosecute you, the penalties are fairly stiff, aren't they?
Well, yes. I mean, you have the criminal possibility, obviously, of going to jail, but if you don't come forward and they do audit you, the potential penalties could be 4, 5, 6 times the value of the account abroad as opposed to just 25%.
Right.
So the financial penalties could potentially be ruinous, let alone the possibility of spending time at the federal penitentiary.
Which I heard is not a nice place. Depending on where you go,
Right.
You don't want to be at any of them. One last question about HSBC. Is it typical that an HSBC obviously is one of the world's largest financial institutions operating across the globe, but is it typical that a private business entity like this is going to willingly work with U.S. tax collectors? Does that happen often?
No, it doesn't. It's quite rare. There are only a handful of instances that it's happened over the recent years. And what really happens is that these banks superficially say that we're following all the laws, and it's questionable whether they aided and abetted or whatever the situation might be. But the government's really not interested in these financial institutions. They're going to be going after the account holders. And essentially what has to happen is that these account holders have to really get some very good advisors on board immediately. And in India, there's only one bank that's being scrutinized right now, and that is HSBC India. One thing that viewers should be aware of is that there's this law coming into effect a couple years from now called FACTA, and that law requires all foreign banks that wish to do business with the U.S. banking system to enter into an agreement with the U.S. government to share their U.S. account holders' names. So essentially what the IRS is doing is deputizing these foreign banks to do all their work, and obviously these foreign banks are not very happy about it. But that is the law, and absent further action, that will take effect, and these foreign banks will be entering into agreements and sharing names. So it really becomes a risk management decision on whether you wish to wait out in the cold and decide and perhaps get that letter in the mail or that knock on the door, or you wish to come clean and voluntarily disclose now.
So, the IRS, I assume they have one interest, and that is collecting money that is owed and penalties on that money. But now I see they're working with banks, and they're kind of using the leverage they have of being the tax collector for the world's largest economy to make sure that banks that want to do business with the U.S., and I assume all international banks want to do business with the U.S., they're going to have to play ball. But it would almost seem like that, going back to the 25% penalty that we talked about earlier, that they are setting that penalty so high, not just to collect money now, but to say to anybody else who's thinking about doing this, don't go put your money in some offshore account and think you're going to get away with not paying taxes. I mean, is that the message that's going out from the IRS?
Yeah, definitely. That they want. It's not illegal to have money offshore.
Right.
It's just illegal not to report it. So that's the IRS's message. Is we're going to enforce these rules now. We have the enforcement mechanism, and so if you want to have a foreign bank account, fine, but just fill out the forms properly, report it, and you won't have any problems.
How did from a manpower standpoint, we've always heard there just simply aren't enough IRS agents even to do routine checks of U.S. taxpayers who have no foreign business interest. I mean, does the IRS now have officials that are working literally abroad? I mean, are there IRS agents working in India on a 24/7 basis, making sure that they're cracking down on this?
No, I don't believe that there are IRS agents in India working on this. But however, with today's technology, they have the ability to look at wires and to ascertain through various databases to find you. And remember, one of the objectives of coming through the voluntary disclosure program is that not only just paying the tax and giving the account information. The IRS actually wants to know all the information about the people's names, the bankers, locations. And it's a big data mining exercise that the IRS is collecting all this information. And this is not me speaking. This is the IRS, where I've been to conferences, and they're telling this to tax attorneys such as Rahul and myself, where they're saying that we are collecting information, and we're doing this in order to make sure that we have as much information about the people, what's happening abroad. So they're not actually outside of this country, but their ability to collect information and analyze the data is getting much, much better than it was a decade ago.
Is this tied solely to collecting taxes, or does this play into a kind of a global perspective of also Homeland Security? I mean, is that what they're looking at as well? Or is Homeland Security using the IRS as a information collector in addition to a tax collector?
Well, I think I think there's a lot of parallels in the past 10 years of what happened with, after 9/11. We had the Patriot Act,
right, which
increased scrutiny on international financial transactions, ostensibly for the purpose of tracking terrorist money moving around. But at the same time, that the rule applies to everyone, so non-terrorists as well. And so, yes, the Patriot Act came into law, and then the increased scrutiny of foreign bank accounts also kind of paralleled at the same time. I don't know if there's a cause and effect directly, but they did happen in parallel.
Right. Well, we've talked a lot about all the bad stuff. We need to talk about some of the good stuff, or at least the potential solutions to some of these problems. And we will do that in our final segment coming up right after this. You're watching the AAHOA Educational Experience. And welcome back. I'm Chip Rogers with the AAHOA Educational Experience, and we are talking about taxes. And with me again today, Rahul Ranadive and Parag Patel. Gentlemen, thank you for being with us. These are two esteemed tax lawyers, and we have talked about who has to pay the tax, why you have to pay the tax, how the IRS enforces this tax, who they're going after, the information that they're trying to get. We've talked about the offshore voluntary disclosure initiative that, as you pointed out, Parag, just recently came to a close, but who knows, there may be another one around the corner here in a couple of years. But what we haven't talked about are really solutions not only for the taxpayer, but solutions for the Internal Revenue Service. I mean, how can this be done better to make sure people are in compliance, and so that taxpayers who, and I assume that this is probably the case with a vast majority of your clients, these are guys that are just wanting to do business, they're just wanting to make money, and they don't have a problem paying their taxes. They want to pay their fair share, but for goodness sakes, they don't want to be overburdened with all these regulations. They don't want to have to hire someone to go do research. They just want to simply pay their taxes. How do we get to that point?
Well, I think the IRS definitely has to do a better job of reaching out to the community, minority communities, and educating them about the compliance rules that are in existence, because that's really most of the people that come to me. It's just they didn't know. They didn't know about the FBAR reporting requirement. So that, I think the IRS definitely, they've made great strides in advertising these amnesty programs over the past couple of years, but the end result is they have to do a better job of advertising and educating the community about the actual rules from the get-go, so that people don't have to enter into an OVDI program.
Right.
Well, one thing that the IRS is still saying is that they have this program, but they're still open for business, and they're willing to, to hear your application for voluntary disclosure, and it's not too late. So if you haven't followed the rules, and if you wish to disclose, and let's be very specific here, this is a disclosure exercise. For most of my clients, and they were not aware of the disclosure requirement. They didn't report the income on their income tax return. But the result will be, for most clients and most taxpayers, there will be either low or no tax due. All right? Aside from penalties, there'll be low or no tax due, and then you have to file all these foreign bank account reports and disclose. But the IRS is still open for business, and they're still willing to take your application. I'm just, even as recently as yesterday, I was on the phone with an IRS representative on this very topic, and I have clients coming to me now in the post-OVDI time period saying, I want to come in, I want to disclose my accounts, is it too late? And I tell them, no, it's not. And it's actually a very similar process. It's not a strict process now, but I suspect that it's even possible to get a better result. You may not have to pay 25%. You may not have to pay the high penalty. You may end up in a better situation going out to the OVDI program, avoiding criminal prosecution, and coming clean and being able to sleep at night.
You don't want to talk about the criminal prosecution again, because I think that is probably the greatest fear that most people have. Even without the OVDI program being in place, has it been your experience that a taxpayer who comes forward and says, look, honest mistake, I didn't know this requirement, I didn't know this law, but now I'm giving you all my information, I'm willing to pay all my taxes, I'll pay those penalties, just don't come after me criminally. I mean, I would assume the IRS wants to work with someone like that.
Yeah, you're exactly right. I mean, criminal prosecution is a big exercise for the IRS, and so they invest their resources only on those specific cases where they can really prove criminal activity. And so for the large majority of the taxpayers, whether it's just an honest mistake, the IRS they'll work with the taxpayer there, and they'll figure out a solution. They'll negotiate some type of penalty and avoid the criminal prosecution, because the IRS just doesn't have the resources to go after every single taxpayer, and they don't have the resources to go after just kind of garden variety non-compliance out of just not knowing the forms. It's only the really, really bad criminal activity cases that they're going to focus on.
And I would think too, I mean, let's face it, the IRS, if they're before a jury, they're not going to win any favors. I mean, nobody likes them. So, unless the IRS can prove that somebody went out of their way to evade taxes knowingly, a jury is just not going to put somebody in jail just because they've simply made a mistake. I mean, do you often have many cases that actually get to any type of trial? I mean, I would imagine 99.9% of these are worked out before you get into a court, right?
Yeah, most of the cases that we've mentioned today and in previous episodes, those were not tried cases. They don't go to trial, and they are essentially plead out. And the reason for that is because these are tax crimes. Tax crimes are black and white. This isn't like a drug crime or an immigration violation, which might be a little bit harder to prove, where there might be intent or,
right.
Did you have an account or didn't you have an account? Did you wire money to India or didn't you? The answer is black and white. It's yes or no. It's a very easy crime to prove. And in fact, that's actually one of the questions I ask a client when they come into my office. I ask them, is there anything else about you that is perhaps unlawful? It could be, a immigration violation, could be a drug violation, could be any other type of unlawful activity. But if you have that in addition to a foreign account, the prosecutor will hang you on the foreign account because that's the easiest path. Remember, these are government prosecutors. They have lots of cases, and they want to do take the easy way out. And a tax crime is the easy way out. It is easy to prove.
I mean, some of the most famous criminal prosecutions have been over tax evasion.
That's right.
Yeah, because you're right, it's a black and white case. And you highlighted something that we probably should have pointed out from the very beginning. If you're someone who has a question, go to an attorney, get an answer, but also remember that you have that attorney-client privilege. Don't hold back from your attorney information that they need to help defend you. I mean, I would sense that some people almost feel embarrassed opening up about all the potential pitfalls they may have in their background, but I mean, tell us from an attorney's perspective, the more information you get, the better you can do defending your client.
Right. That's always one of the first things that I talk about with potential clients in the initial interview is I make certain that they understand that this cannot be a piecemeal process where I learn about information bit by bit over time, that I have to have the full picture from the beginning. Otherwise, my advice will not make sense because it's incomplete and based on incomplete information. So right away from the beginning, I make all potential clients understand that they have to tell me anything and everything about all of their foreign activities. And I can't learn about something 6 months from now. And it's even worse if I learn about it from the IRS agent and says, "Oh, your client, by the way, has this." Then it really puts me in a bad situation, and I can't do anything for the client at that point.
And Parag, we've got about 1 minute to go. So if you're talking to the viewers and they have any questions, I mean, what is the best thing they can do to protect themselves to make sure that they don't have to come to you worrying about some sort of criminal prosecution later?
Well, they should talk to an advisor, and that could be an attorney. If you have an attorney, even if it's your real estate attorney, that attorney-client privilege works with them as well. They will hopefully bring you in touch with a tax attorney that's qualified in this particular area, and get the counseling that you need. A lot of people are not aware of all of the tax complications of having an international account, and it's difficult as there's lots of requirements. So get professional help. And the answer might be you don't go and do a voluntary disclosure, but at least you make a meaningful, informed decision, and you know the risks, and you don't go through it with your eyes closed.
The ounce of prevention, you mentioned it earlier. It's so helpful. All right, gentlemen, thank you so much for being with us. This has been very informational. So for Parag Patel and for Rahul Ranadive, gentlemen, thanks for being on the AAHOA Educational Experience. I'm Chip Rogers, and you can contact me, chip@ahoa.com, chip@ahoa.com. We'll see you again next week.